Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell. Charlie Hickman and Leslie Sessoms are here, and we are the moderators for the Facebook page, Texas Women Photographers Circle. Some of you may not be on Facebook, so we've created an Instagram page at Texas Women Photographers, and we'll post all of the monthly meetings so that you can join us as well. Every month, we will introduce you to a guest that will inspire you to try something new. Our guest tonight is Kelly Ishmael. Kelly's images will grab your attention, but her heartwarming captions will captivate you. Kelly shares her thoughts and daily observations that reflect her appreciation for the ordinary moments that fill her day. Inspired by nature and those magical moments of light, she's able to translate them into extraordinary images. Kelly's blog, Minding My Nest, Practicing the Art of Ordinary Life, is a collection of thoughtful and well-crafted stories that you'll find on her website, mindingmynest.com. In tonight's presentation, Kelly will share some of her favorite kinds of magic that she captures with her camera, bokeh, shadows and light, reflections, and she'll show you how to find the places where science and magic meet to create delightful and compelling photographs. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Texas Women Photographers Circle. And let's just admit, Kelly, we have met before. You had, I found you on Instagram about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and I invited you to come and do a presentation for a group that I host called the Happiness Hour. And when I was putting together a program for this group, I wanted only female speakers, and you were on my list. You're like 1 and 2, and I thought I'm just going to ask her to see if she'd come. And I thank you so much for coming, and I cannot wait for the ladies in this room get to listen and see some of the images that you're going to share, because I know they're great.
Well, I just appreciate those kind words. Like, you can't imagine. I mean, it's just very heartwarming, and I thank you so much for that. And I thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts here with your group. I told you earlier, I've had the opportunity to be part of several different women's photography groups over the years, and I've just found those experiences to be so meaningful. I've learned so much, been inspired personally just by the women themselves and then their photos. So just super happy to be here and to give a little presentation. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I did a little bitty, intro, and I know I glossed over because you have so much more than what I can share. So is there something I missed that you want to make sure that we know about?
No, I think we chatted earlier. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma with my husband. We're empty nesters. We have one daughter. She will be 29 this year, which is bananas. She got married last summer to the most wonderful guy. So we have a daughter and a son-in-law now. They're doing really well. And yeah, my heart is just super full about that. So that's where we are. I've got 2 fur kids, that constant companions, and make me laugh and drive me crazy at the same time. So I think that's pretty much everything there is to know about me.
That's a lot of good stuff, though.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
All right, well, let's get into your program.
Great. So my presentation is called Everyday Magic. And like Linda said, it's just these places, ordinary moments, light-filled moments. I like to call it places where science and magic meet, because it might look magical, but there is a scientific or a technical reason. And I think if you can notice the magic with your eyes, but then be able to demystify it a little bit with your camera when it comes together, it's really awesome for me as a photographer. So thank you for letting me present here today. I got started. I was a longtime scrapbooker when my daughter was younger. I did all the vacations and birthdays and all of those kind of things, took pictures, snapshots of all of those, filled up scrapbooks with that. just the normal kinds of things a lot of moms would take photos of. But after my daughter graduated from high school in 2011, I like to call it, I'm using my air quotes, my empty nest induced midlife crisis. I just kind of dug a little bit deeper into photography. It was always something that I had loved to do. So I decided to dig a little bit deeper into that. And so the first step into, I overuse air quotes, by the way. I call it capital P photography. My first introduction into photography as an art form was through a class that was given by a woman named Tracy Clark. Some of you might know her from her work. She had a women's photography group called Shutter Sisters. She's also written a few books. The name of her class was Picture Fall, and it encouraged the participants to see their world through the camera lens and cultivate an awareness and appreciation for the simple beauty of the ordinary, familiar scenes in their lives. I mean, this was just right up my alley. And these are some of the images that I took from that class in 2011. And I wanted to share them specifically in my presentation because this is kind of my starting point, right? Like we all have a starting point, and maybe my photography style has changed a little bit over the years, but at its core, like these are the same kind of images I still take. Maybe, they're a little better exposed, or maybe a little bit better composed, or my post-processing has evolved, but the essence of what I was trying to capture, like it really inspired me to learn how to capture these kind of moments. And so that was, like I could say, that's the beginning of my journey in photography. And I say, it sounds so dramatic when I say it out loud, but photography changed my life because when I learned to see the world different, I learned to see myself different. And in that process, my nest wasn't all that empty anymore. It really just filled me up in such a profound way. So that's kind of how I got started on my journey. And so photography opened my eyes to a whole new world of beauty and wonder. And in learning to see the world with new eyes, I learned how to see my own life with new eyes. And so for the past 10 years, I've been practicing my craft and growing as a photographer. And as is so often in the case, there came a point when I was really trying to hone my style or develop my voice. And it all finally clicked for me, once again with the air quotes and a lame pun. It was about 5 years ago while I was reading Cheryl Strayed's popular memoir, Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. And it was this quote in particular that really hit home for me. As difficult and maddening as the trail could be, there was hardly ever a day that passed that didn't offer up some sort of what was called trail magic in the PCT vernacular. The unexpected and sweet happenings that stand out in stark relief to the challenges of the trail. So the minute I read this, I reached into my nightside table and I grabbed a pen, and then I underlined and highlighted the entire passage in the book. These words resonated with me so deeply because they echoed my own desire to capture the beauty and simple joys in my ordinary life, the sweet relief, if you will, from the demands of my to-do list and the challenges of a world that sometimes feels like it's trying to suck every last bit of joy out of this life. And so this became my creative vision for my photography and the inspiration for my philosophy of everyday magic. So in terms of photography, I think it's important to clarify what I mean by my use of magic, because it doesn't have anything to do with mysterious tricks or casting spells or working with supernatural powers. Instead, I like to think of magic as a quality that makes something seem removed from everyday life. Little moments of happiness where we have the chance to encounter the extraordinary. Or in other words, delight, enchantment, wonder, or charm. This kind of magic is easy to miss though, baskets of laundry and sinks full of dishes and floors that need swept and bills that need paid. All of those things scream for attention in the course of our days. But that's exactly why I think it's so important to look for magic. So this photo is a perfect example. Scientifically speaking, there's absolutely nothing mysterious about how dewdrops form, and yet what a joy it was that morning was lying in the grass, taking a few minutes with my camera to capture these dewdrops and see all of these enchanting droplets of water in the grass in my front yard, just to allow myself to be astonished by the way the camera lens turned the dewdrops into little orbs of light. And then to take a moment to acknowledge the wonders of nature and experience a deep sense of gratitude for the gift of that morning. This is what I call everyday magic. The simple joys that come from being a witness to the beauty, the wonder, and the magic of our ordinary lives. And in this presentation, I will be sharing a few of my favorite kinds of magic to capture with my DSLR camera. These are the places where science and magic meet, and I love how they come together to create delightful, compelling photographs. So the first kind of magic I would love to share with you is bokeh. I've also heard it called bouquet. I've heard it a couple of different ways, but however you like to pronounce it, it is just, in my opinion, truly magical in its effect on a photograph. So photographically speaking, though, bokeh is defined as the aesthetic quality of the blur produced by the camera lens in the out of focus parts of an image. And what makes this unique visual experience seem magical is the fact that you and I are not able to actually see bokeh with our superior human vision and excellent depth of field. Bokeh is totally a function of seeing through the lens of a camera. So the key to capturing bokeh in your photos starts by using a wide aperture setting to achieve a shallow depth of field, which is what creates the blur in the background. And this brings me to my next tip, which is to pay attention and be mindful of the background or the foreground of your main subject. And then lastly, to change the way the bokeh looks, you can experiment with the distance between the subject and the background, as well as the distance between the lens and the subject. This can have a big effect on the look of the bokeh in your images. It could be either muted tones in a very washed out type of background, or it can be like literally little bubbles of light, little circles. So just playing around with those types of things will really change the look and feel of the bokeh in your photo. And I thought I would share a couple of examples of some different, a couple of examples of images with different types of bokeh, and give you some of the background information of these images when I shot them. So for this image, these were some black-eyed Susans in my garden, and I shot this photo with my 100mm macro lens with an aperture setting of f4.0. My lens was probably, I don't know, 12 to 18 inches from the flowers, the main flower here in the front. And I set my focal point on the center of this main flower in the foreground. Now notice how the flowers just immediately beyond this main subject, they become gradually more and more blurred out. But then also notice the blurred mix of tones from all of the plants in the background. They were probably 5 to 10 feet from where I was standing when I took this photo. And so the further away from the subject, the more blurred the background becomes, to the point where it can also just look like this muted collection of tones. I actually really love the tones in the background. I love how the colors work together. I love how it almost has a painterly feel. So that's something definitely to keep in mind when you are shooting with your macro lens. So for this next shot, These are some little dewdrops on the bushes in my backyard. My favorite thing was just the way they outline the edges of the leaf. I mean, it's so interesting the way that happens. So this shot I took with my 50mm lens, and this lens has a maximum or a minimum. I never know exactly what to say, if it's the maximum aperture or the minimum aperture, but it has a very wide depth of field. F1.2 is its widest aperture opening. And I shot this with an aperture setting of F2.5. Once again, it's a very wide aperture, which allows for a very shallow depth of field. I was probably about 18 inches away from the plants. And the thing I would like to point out in this image is there's bokeh not only in the background of the photo, so in the background or beyond, I mean, those plants were probably 5 or 10 feet from the subject that I was shooting, but there's also bokeh in the foreground because of that very shallow depth of field. Everything in front, in the foreground of where I set my focal point, that also was slightly blurred. And because it's a little bit closer to me, the bokeh looks a little bit different. So it, like I said, it varies between how close you are to your subject and how close your subject is to either the foreground or the background. Okay, for my next, I'm sorry. I believe that the artistic use of bokeh can add a magical quality to any photograph. I love how the light bounces around and reflects off the surrounding surfaces to create a beautiful backdrop for my subjects. And I love how these enchanting orbs of light can transform the most ordinary of subjects into something extraordinary. Okay, now on to the next section. In this section, I would like to talk a little bit about reflections. And I like the connection between reflections in a photo and my reflective nature, or my reflective nature as a person. Looking back over my life helps me to make sense of things. What can sometimes look like unrelated bits and bobs of my life will often, when viewed with a reflective lens, reveal larger themes and gifts that might first go unnoticed. And so similarly, when shooting with reflections in mind, it can often help us to tell a better, more complete, or more interesting story than a subject on its own. The magical thing about reflections is they offer us a different perspective and sometimes even turn our worlds upside down. And depending on the nature of the reflective surface, the way we see an object in the reflection can change dramatically, which is why when we use reflective surfaces in our photos, we are able to completely transform an image from something that's fairly ordinary and straightforward into something that feels richer or has an abstract or maybe mysterious quality. So a few tips for creating images with compelling reflections. The first would be, by nature, a reflection implies that there is also a subject being reflected. And so to that end, interesting subjects make for interesting reflections. So be mindful of choosing both your subject and the reflection. Also, don't be afraid to experiment with your focal point. And by this, I mean focusing on the reflected subject or the reflection itself. And remember, the goal is to create an image that is made more interesting or thought-provoking by the use of a reflection. So once again, I would like to share a couple of examples of some reflection photos. And in this first example, this was the holidays a couple of years ago, and the reflector in my photo is my driveway, which is in the foreground, and it had rained that day. And then the subject being reflected is the light display in my neighbor's yard. So by placing my focal point in the foreground, it blurred out the background, creating the delightful bokeh. But because of the rough, irregular surface of the driveway, the reflection is more diffuse, giving the whole scene a slightly abstract or mysterious quality. And just for a few stats on the photo itself, I took this with my 50mm lens with a aperture setting of f1 point or an f1.8. Now, in contrast to the previous shot, the smooth, almost mirror-like surface of my computer screen creates a clearer image and provides a much more realistic reflection. And what I love about these kinds of reflections is that they are a great storytelling device. In this shot, my computer screen and desk area is obviously the main subject, but by including the reflection, it offers the viewer a little more context about the scene as a whole. And I think overall, the reflection makes for a more interesting photo. And for this shot, I used my Tamron 24-70mm lens with a aperture setting of f3.2. I like to think of reflections as a way to tell two stories in one photo, the story of the subject and the story of the reflector. On their own, they each tell us something about the scene in our viewfinder. But when they are viewed in a photo as a whole, reflections offer us the opportunity to see our world a little bit differently, and that's where the magic happens. Okay, for this last section, I am going to focus on one of my favorite kinds of magic to capture, and that is shadows and light. The past few years, I have come to really appreciate and embrace the shadows in my photography. I love how shadows can convey a mood or create more drama in an image. Conversely, the use of shadows in a photo can actually emphasize the light to show us what is important in the scene or spotlight little details that we might have otherwise missed. By its very nature, shadow tells the story of the light. When it comes to using shadow and light in your photos, I like to say that they are two sides of the same coin, each with its own story to tell. Shadow and light are on opposite sides of the histogram, and so like opposing forces, this interplay between the two creates conflict or tension in an image. And like any compelling story, this conflict is what gives your photo a direction, propels the visual narrative, and fuels the viewer's interest. When it comes to capturing the shadows in your photos, my first tip would be to simply cultivate an awareness for those places where shadows and light meet. And then when you are presented with these kinds of opportunities, avoid the tendency to light the whole scene, or as I like to say, let the light be light and the dark be dark. Sometimes this can be as simple as underexposing your images. I've often heard this called exposing for the light. Finally, you can also increase the contrast and deepen the shadows in post-processing for even more drama or to enhance the shadows even further. Okay, so here's a recent example of a photo that I took of some shadows in my studio space. I shot this with my 24-70 lens with a aperture setting of f2.8. And I love how the evening light created this dramatic shadow on the wall. It's a spare bedroom of mine that I use kind of as a photography studio. The shadow of the blinds acts almost like a reflection in the way it gives more context to the scene and tells more of the story. In terms of exposure, I underexposed this shot by about 2/3 of a stop and boosted the contrast in Lightroom. This places the emphasis on the shadow rather than lighting the entire scene. And I like that it gives a little bit more mood or a little bit more mystery to the photo in general. The shadow is really the subject of the photo, not so much all of the little things that are on my desk or on my table. In this next photo, the glorious little pool of light in this scene was a literal bright spot in my day that day. It's the very definition of magic in my book. I love how the light from the setting sun crept in through the narrow space between my house and my neighbor's house to illuminate the little branches of the dormant shrub in the foreground. To achieve this look, I started by underexposing my shot by one full stop, and then I bumped up the contrast and used some of the local adjustment tools in Lightroom to play up the light and enhance that little pool of light on the shrubs there in the foreground. These past few years, I have been learning to see shadow in a whole new light. Lame pun, once again, totally intended. I find these unlit areas of a photo to be intriguing, and so therefore I do not work to diminish their effect. Similarly, I have also learned to embrace the shadows. As I have learned to embrace the shadows in my photography, I am also learning to appreciate the shadows or the darker places in my own life. These struggles and challenges have a way of shining a very bright light on what is most important to me. So once again, I would like to thank Linda for inviting me here tonight to share my photos and my philosophy with you all. And I would love to thank you all for your time and just the opportunity to be here. If you have any questions about any of the images in particular, I'm happy to stick around and give you any more background information that I can. So I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen. Do you want me to go ahead and unshare my screen, Linda?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was rolling through here. So ladies, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I do like this note from, there's several Ashleys in here. So I'm just gonna say it's just from Ashley, but that made me giggle. She says, when I grow up, I want to shoot like you.
Oh, that is the kindest thing. That
sweet?
is just the kindest thing to say.
That is really
Thank you
sweet.
very much, Ashley.
Yeah.
What a lovely thing to say.
There's some lovely comments in here, Kelly, and I'm going to definitely, like I always do, I'll share this stuff with you later so that you'll have it. And it's so meaningful when people take the time to put comments in a chat, especially after you've kind of like opened your underwear drawer and showed us, the things that are, that mean a lot to you. And, we're all strangers, really. We haven't met in person. So we're just little talking heads, but it really means a lot for you to take your time to come out here and put together a presentation and then share it. So I so appreciate that.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's really, yeah. I'm delighted to do it. Thank you very much.
You guys, you ladies, I'm so used to saying guys, you ladies can connect with Kelly at mindingmynest.com. And if you're on Instagram, please look for her at Kelly Ish. That's KellyIsh. Yeah. So next month, April 7th, landscape photographer Jessica Sapili will join us with her presentation, The Ultimate Guide to Landscape Photography. So keep an eye on the Facebook and Instagram pages for upcoming programs. And until next month, stay creative.